If I had answered that message, I wouldn't be here anymore. The message I received wasn't meant for me, and I understood that almost immediately because it felt like the end of a conversation I had never been part of. It appeared just after midnight with no sender name, no phone number, and no explanation, just a single sentence that didn't make sense on its own. Don't open the door again, not after tonight. I stared at the screen for a long time, expecting something else to follow. A correction, an apology, or at least a question, but nothing came, and even though I told myself it was probably a mistake or a prank, I still locked the door before going to bed. About an hour later, there was a knock, not loud or urgent, but slow and deliberate. Three calm taps that sounded less like someone trying to get inside and more like someone announcing that they had arrived. My phone vibrated almost at the same time, and the message on the screen said, "They're still there." I stood in the hallway staring at the door, waiting for the handle to move or for a shadow to pass under it. But nothing happened, and another message followed. "They're waiting," which made the situation feel less like a coincidence and more like a strange kind of coordination. I typed back to ask who I was talking to, and the reply came immediately, telling me that I had asked that question before, even though I was sure I hadn't. When I checked the timestamp, I noticed that the message was marked as being sent a few minutes in the future. Not delayed, but ahead of my own time. And that was the first moment when the situation stopped feeling merely unsettling and started feeling fundamentally wrong. Another knock followed, slower than the first, and then my phone vibrated again to tell me that whoever was outside knew I was reading the messages. I stepped away from the door, suddenly certain that opening it was the one thing I shouldn't do, and after a long silence the knocking stopped, replaced by a message that congratulated me for passing the first test, even though I had no idea what I had been tested on or why. That night I didn't sleep, and when morning finally came, I left my apartment without telling anyone where I was going. Not because I had a plan, but because I wanted distance between myself and that door. I drove aimlessly for a while until my phone vibrated again to tell me that I was going the wrong way, which made me pull over in confusion, since no one should have known where I was headed. When I asked how they knew, the answer I received was simply that they had been there before, which made me realize that the messages weren't instructions about what was happening, but records of something that had already happened. I began to understand that I wasn't being guided along a new path, but retracing one I had walked before without remembering it. And that realization became impossible to ignore when I discovered an old, hidden conversation on my phone with the same number, containing the same warnings, the same questions, and even a few voice notes recorded in my own voice. One of which said, "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't stop." Following the address in that old conversation led me to an empty office building with a single room full of monitors showing recordings of people receiving messages, hesitating, making choices, and moving on. And among all those names and faces, I saw my own listed multiple times, marked as part of something called Cycle 7, which made me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't a warning system, but a kind of filter designed to observe how people respond when they are uncertain and afraid. In a moment of panic or anger, I smashed one of the screens, and for a brief moment the messages stopped and my phone went silent. But the silence only lasted long enough to make me believe I had done something meaningful before a new message appeared thanking me for my participation and informing me that the parameters were being reset. I ran from the building, not knowing exactly what I was running from, only that I felt as if I had stepped out of something I wasn't supposed to see. I don't remember clearly how I got home, only that I woke up in my own bed with my phone on the table beside me and no messages on the screen, no number to block, and no proof that any of it had happened, except for the one detail I couldn't explain. The front door was unlocked. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, trying to remember whether I had locked it when I came in. And the more I tried to remember, the more I realized how unreliable my memory suddenly felt. It wasn't that I had forgotten something specific, but that I had lost confidence in the idea that my memories were entirely my own. And that feeling was far more disturbing than the messages had been. For the next few days, I lived normally, or at least I tried to, going to work, speaking to people, answering emails, and doing all the things that make a life feel ordinary. But beneath that surface, I felt as if I were waiting for something to happen again, even though I didn't know what it was or whether I wanted it to return. Every time my phone vibrated for any reason, my body reacted before my mind did, and I would feel that same tension in my chest, as if part of me still believed I was being watched or tested. At night, I dreamed about hallways and doors and rooms full of screens, but the dreams were never clear enough to feel like memories and never abstract enough to feel like imagination. And I would wake up with the uneasy sense that I had been somewhere else while I slept. I began writing things down, not because I knew what I was trying to record, but because I wanted some evidence that my experiences were happening in a sequence I could follow, that they were part of a story with a beginning and an end. One evening, I noticed that my notes had started to repeat themselves, not exactly, but in a way that felt familiar, as if I had written similar thoughts before in slightly different words. And that was when I understood that what frightened me most wasn't the idea that someone had been watching me, but the possibility that I wasn't as unique or as unpredictable as I liked to believe. I realized that the system I had seen in that building didn't need to control people directly because it only needed to observe them long enough to learn how they behave, how they hesitate, and how they decide. And once it understood that, it could predict what they would do next without having to intervene at all. That understanding didn't make me feel angry or rebellious. It made me feel small, like a pattern that had mistaken itself for a choice. I don't know whether that system still exists or whether my part in it is truly over, but I do know that sometimes late at night, I still find myself looking at my phone as if I'm waiting for it to light up again. Not because I want it to, but because part of me wants to know whether I am really free or whether I am simply in a part of the story where nothing happens for a while. And I suppose that as long as I'm still asking that question, I'm not entirely sure which one it is.